we're going to cover some nuts and bolts. And when we do this program in person, we often get a chance to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of putting together resumes and cover letters. And so many of you, and I might ask for a show of hands for those of you that I can see, how many of you have actually started to edit or craft your resume to reach a legal audience? Is there anybody that's actually started that process yet? Okay. Sometimes we have folks that have had different backgrounds. They may have worked in law firms or in the profession in some way, shape, or form, and already have a resume that they're using. So we always ask out of the gate when we're working with our students, what experience do you have, so that we can move along and try not to be redundant as we are sharing information. So what I'm going to do is I have a series of screens on a PowerPoint that I'm going to go through. I will tomorrow send you the PowerPoint for today, so you can take notes or you'll have notes from the PowerPoint. And I'm also going to send you tomorrow the handout that we have on writing resumes and cover letters for a legal audience. It has a lot more detail involved in it than I'm going to talk about today, including a great list of action verbs that can be a cheat sheet. And I know many of you had access to that when you were in college, but it's just a much more thorough guide. So today is just kind of hitting the highlights and an opportunity just to kind of get you ready to prepare your draft. What we're going to ask you to do is, before you meet with your counselor for the first time after October 15th, in addition to having your completed ICP or individual career plan, we're going to ask that you send a draft of your legal resume so that we have both of those documents either in person if we're meeting that way, or if we're meeting virtually, so that we have that information prior to our first meeting. And what that means for you is you don't have to rush to have a meeting in October. You can wait, you can do it when you have time. But that's the first possible time that students can begin to meet with us. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to keep everybody on mute, but at the end we'll have time for some questions. If you do have any questions during the program, I think if Lima doesn't mind, perhaps we can put them in the chat and Lima will take a look at that for us. But I'm going to share my screen and I'm just going to go through some things and just talk you through this, okay? All right, can you see the screen? There we go, that's better.
We can't see the screen.
We can't. Oh, now it's here.
There we go.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you, thank you. So first and foremost, let's get you started here. Most important thing about a legal resume is that it is a unique format. It's very different than resumes that we may have done if we worked in other professional situations. So the reason that we want you to take some time to think about the previous resume that you've created and recrafting it for this legal audience is so that you can put your best foot forward. We want you to represent yourself in the best possible light. And in doing so, there are some simple rules which we're going to go through today. And you can put your own personal touch on your resume, but you have to remember that being professional, keeping it relatively conservative and traditional is going to be the best approach. By and large, resumes and cover letters are often your first contact with a potential employer. So it's the first thing that gets sent to an employer, either when you're directly applying for an opening or if you're sending a query and you're exploring opportunities. We know that a well-crafted resume demonstrates experience and skills. And if you're coming from a different professional area, or if you're coming straight from college and you have experience in other areas, there are ways to demonstrate the experience that you've built in other areas that may be relevant and helpful for legal employers. Also, resumes and cover letters provide an opportunity to highlight your achievements, your honors, and your accomplishments. Remember, though, it's not a laundry list. So it's a highlight of your accomplishments, but it's not everything and in all of the detail that you may have provided for previous positions. Cover letters also serve to introduce you and your resume. They're often also viewed as your first writing sample. So I know many of you are working on your legal memo right now in lawyering, and that will often become your first legal writing sample that you'll submit when you're applying for internships for the summer. However, many folks will look at that cover letter as this is your writing sample. How you write, what you're saying, and how you share information will be viewed critically. So we want you to prepare cover letters that are appropriate and that are also well written. So before you begin to do your resume and your cover letter, we want you to think about some questions. Who's your intended audience? If you're applying for an internship, is it with a law firm? Is it with a business? Is it a judge for a judicial internship? Is it for a legal or law clerk position? There are so many different audiences that you may potentially be writing to that we want you to be thinking about that in advance. In addition, what is the position that you're applying for? As you want to make sure that in your documents, especially your cover letter, that you are indicating why you're writing. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. In addition, you get an opportunity to highlight the skills and experience that are going to be appropriate for this target audience. So based on your answers, you may determine which skills that you want to highlight. For example, if you're writing and your research skills are most important, or your communications and your negotiation skills are important, those you may decide that you have different resumes and cover letters for different audiences. We find, I guess it's the counselors in the Career Center, we find that most students will begin by just creating one simple resume that they're using because their audiences are not going to change that much as they're starting out. But as you are going along, you may decide that you want a different type of a resume or different cover letters. Think in advance also, why you're interested in the position and the employer. We all know that if we've been interviewed, a common question when we're interviewed is, why do you want to work for us? But as you're thinking about writing your resume and writing your cover letter for a legal audience, think about, why are you interested? What gets you excited about this particular position with this employer? One of the things I have my students do is think in advance, if you're hired, what types of projects might you be involved in? So if it's a position as a law clerk in a law firm, what are some of the tasks that you might be asked to do, so that you can think about what are the experiences that you want to highlight within your own resume and cover letter that will speak to the needs of the employer. And then finally, when you're writing cover letters, if you're writing to a law firm or a small nonprofit or a large government agency, business, or a judge, your language is probably going to be different. You may write more in some cases and less in others. And we'll address that. And also, as you work with your assigned career counselor, we'll talk to you about, what's the best approach for these different audiences. So when we talk about formatting and creating the content for your legal resume, I want you to be thinking about selecting that professional and traditional format. So that means no graphics, no tables, no emojis, no charts, no shading, no photos. I know that this probably sounds ridiculous, but almost every semester we are reminding students that the legal community tends to be very conservative, and they're looking for a certain type of resume for the kinds of candidates that they're interested in. Also, you're looking at a resume that needs to be concise, accurate, error-free, well-organized, clear, easy to read, visually pleasing. I've worked in higher education for over 30 years, and I have to tell you that one of the experiences that I had a long time ago was working with a mechanical engineering student who was almost top in his class. He was applying for positions. And so I said, all right, send me the documents that you are applying with. And I kid you not, the resume that he sent me had been scanned and was crooked on the page. So what he was sending to employers was kind of sloppy work. So once we got that cleaned up and he understood that people were making assumptions about the quality of his work based on what he was saying about himself and his documents. He was fine. He was able to move along, was able to apply, was able to find positions, and it all worked out. But we want you to think about that in advance. It does take some time to format. It does take some time to proofread your documents, and it is important. Be consistent with spacing and tabs throughout your resume. Lema and I will both tell you that when students upload documents into Albany Law Link, and you'll do that going forward, that you will see, that we will see documents that have been converted from Word to PDF that may have an extra page, or sometimes files get corrupted. So it's real important that each of us take a look at our documents and make sure that they, that they read well, that they've scanned well, and that you are attending to those small details. Keep in mind that you don't want to have your margins any smaller than a 0.5. It becomes sloppy and visually difficult to read. Also, and in different professions, people will tell you different things. But for a legal resume, we'd like you to select one professional font style and use that for your entire document. We do recommend Times New Roman. Some students will use other Arial or Calibri, but just pay attention to make sure that it is easy to read and it does present professionally. Your content size. So that means most of the content on your resume should be no smaller than 10.5 and no larger than 12 point. And that's so that people can read it. Again, your heading may be a little bit larger or your name may be a little bit larger, but please, try to keep it less than 16 point for your name. It just becomes too large and takes up too much room on the page. When we think about the length of your document, definitely one page for most law students in their first year. And I, over and over, students will ask, I have professional experience and I spill into a second page, or I have multiple advanced degrees beyond a bachelor's degree. What should I do? Talk to your counselor. There are times that it's in your best interest to have a second page. I may not go to a third page, but a second page may be warranted. Just talk with us. We're here to be your best advocate. A rule of thumb is always, if you spill to a second page and you don't get to the halfway point, then think about getting it all on one page. But if you can get to the halfway point and you have content that is relevant for the employers that you are applying to, then that may be okay. Most students don't realize that you're going to be creating multiple documents for potential employers. So make sure that the heading that you're choosing and the font style and the font sizes that you're selecting are the same on all of the documents that you're creating. So ultimately on your resume, your cover letter, your list of references potentially, your cover page for your writing sample. There are many different documents that you'll be creating that you will want to use the same font style and font size so that they are all, they represent you well. For legal resumes, objectives, summaries generally are not used. Not a good idea to include your resume or your references, salary requirements, or any of those other kinds of details on your resume itself. And again, that does vary from other professions, but for the legal community, those are not necessary. When you are referring to your experiences, if they are in the past, use past tense. If they are current positions that you hold, then you may use present tense. That is also a little bit awkward for some folks, but that's perfectly okay to do. So we're going to then talk about some other details. So after your heading, the next section that you have on your legal resume will be your education. So you're listing Albany Law School first, because that is the highest or the current degree that you're currently seeking. After you're within your education section, and I'm going to show you a sample resume in just a little bit, but I want to talk through this because it's a way for people to start to organize their thoughts around where some information can be included on their legal resume. So subsections under academic institutions can include honors, awards, activities. Ultimately, you'll be adding your GPA, your rank. There are other other subsections that will be added, but initially honors, awards, and activities are the kinds of things that we see on 1L resumes. Those subsections allow you to include some information so that you don't have to provide a lot of detail that may have gone under an experience section previously, but that you're connecting to your academic or your scholarship within each of the institutions that you've attended. Depending upon your experience, you may want to consolidate your college-related experiences and activities and sports under those activities under college or your other advanced degrees. What we're going to ask you to do as you're thinking about putting together this first resume is look at your past experience and edit it to provide more concise descriptions. So some of the things that we want you to be thinking about will be how to highlight your transferable skills that are going to really resonate with legal employers. They include research, interviewing, investigating, counseling, strategizing, writing, communicating, organizing, time management, leadership. There are others, but those are some of the fundamentals that we often will see employers looking for and will use in their language for their job postings or internship postings. And that's another good clue for you too. Take a look at the job postings and make sure that you're using some of the same keywords in your resume that you're finding on the job search posting. Depending upon the organization, some law firms and corporations will use applicant tracking systems to actually have you apply online and then use those systems to search for resumes. We just want to make sure that your resumes get noticed because you're using some of the keywords. But you will find that a lot of small and medium-sized employers and law firms don't use applicant tracking systems. They have you apply directly by email or sometimes snail mail. That still happens. So we want you to just be mindful that using those keywords can be helpful to get your resume noticed. In addition to some of the other sort of traditional sections, and what we don't typically talk about with 1L resumes, but I do want to point out, is that there are some students that come to law school having publications from undergrad or from another graduate program. If that is the case, the publication section would follow your education section on your legal resume. One of the last things that I want to point out is that you may have a section for community service or volunteering if you are looking to go into public interest, not-for-profit, government. So if you want to highlight some of those kinds of experiences, talk with your counselor. There may be a way to set up a section, especially for your first year, to highlight those experiences. Some students will ask, should I put interests or skills at the bottom of the resume? And the answer to that is yes, if they're relevant and if there's information that will round out who you are, provide a sort of a third dimension with employers. So some of the things you may consider adding to that section might be foreign language skills, some interests that you have that may set you apart from others. Volunteer community service can sometimes go in that section if you don't want to separate those out. I've seen all kinds of things in that kind of a section. I had a student once a couple of years ago here at the law school who collected timepieces, watches, and clocks, and every interview someone asked him about that hobby that he had. So if you have a hobby or an interest, or if you're a 46er and you've climbed the Adirondack high peaks, there are things that people would enjoy learning about and would like to talk to you about. And we can certainly advise you on what to include and maybe some things that you may not want to include because we don't want the section to be too long. I would not advise you to include some things that people would expect you to have. So skills in Microsoft Office or Excel or using Westlaw's or research tool or the other tools or platforms. Be mindful that everything you include on your resume is fair game. Every time you send a resume, remind yourself, what have I included? Can I talk about everything that's on this? Can I talk about these interests? As I said about the guy that had a hobby of collecting timepieces, if he had just written that down casually and hadn't collected or didn't care about his collection, hadn't thought about it in 3 years, that probably would have been awkward. But because it was something he was actively doing, it was a fun part of the conversation and somebody got to know him a little bit better by asking him questions. one of the last things that I really want to make sure that you are aware of is that every document that you submit has to be both error-free and cannot contain inaccuracies. You're responsible for putting on your correct GPA and rank if you choose to put those on going forward, your dates of employment, your graduation dates from college. So as you are developing these documents, just keep an eye on, and I know this because I've raised 2 kids, have helped them with resumes. You're doing things quick, you're doing things in the middle of the night just to apply. Pay attention to proofing, looking at your work. You know, when I was in grad school, we were taught to read from the bottom up on a short document because it helps you to catch errors. Don't rely on spell check. It will fool you every single time. So what I'd like to do is show you a little bit of, I can do this easily. I want to show you a resume if I can get it up here easily here. All right, let's see. Well, sorry about that. So what you probably don't know about most of us is that we in the Career Center are working from home part of the time and in the office part of the time. So one of the interesting things that we are experiencing is our monitors and our laptops. And so here we go. I'm going to show you a sample resume. Can everybody see that okay? Okay. So Sally Smith, we use her a lot. Basic information. And don't overthink your first resume. That happens all the time when we're working with our students. Just don't overthink this process. Your name, your address, your email, your phone number. If you have a LinkedIn profile and you have it's professional and you have a good photo and it's somewhat up to date, meaning that you have information on there that would be important for someone to know about, put it up. That's fine. But if it isn't, don't include it. Education section, Albany Law School of Union University. Don't ask. It's somehow Albany Law School is still connected to a broader community of Union University, which included Albany Med and the pharmacy school. So it's still actually part of your transcript and how your degree will be depicted. So we do encourage students to include that on there. While you were in law school, candidate for Juris Doctor, and the month and the year that you anticipate graduating. If you received any awards upon entry, you may include those. If you are a part of an honors program, or if you have other information that would be relevant. Most students at this point have not joined any clubs or organizations, so that's not generally information that we show on this first sample resume. The next section would be your undergraduate degree, if you came right out of law undergrad, or if you have advanced degrees, list those first. Same process. You're going to list the name of the school, the degree, and then those subsections that are relevant. If you do have Greek honors, you want to list that information between your degree and your major. All right. So for this student, Sally, she had some activities, and she also wanted to include her senior thesis because it might be for her a writing sample that she could use for certain positions that she's applying for. Under experience, you'll see that she had experience working as a spa director after she graduated, and included some basic information, but some information that may be relevant that she could transfer to working in a law firm or working in government or not-for-profit. So there's some different kinds of skills that she may be able to transfer into another setting. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I just wanted to give you a sense of visually how we like to see the first resume structured. You'll see that it doesn't have any bullets, and it's very short. At the very bottom, we have included a language skills and interests section, just so that you have a sense of what are some of the things that may be okay to include. All right, so what I'm going to do next, I'm going to go back to our presentation. Thanks for being patient. My poor desktop is so busy. Can you all see that yet?
No, it didn't come on the screen
No.
yet.
Okay. Okay. Better.
It's up now.
Thank you. All right. So now let's talk about cover letters. All right. I'm just going to do a show of hands just because this is always fun in a workshop. But how many people do not like to write cover letters? Yeah. And you know, one of the things that we find is that it's frustrating because sometimes people miss a few steps. And so they jump right in wanting to write a cover letter. And really what you need to do is back it up a little bit. So use these tips as a way just to think through what you're writing before you start to write so that you're less frustrated and you can accomplish what you want. Once you get a draft of a cover letter, and we're not there yet, but share it with whoever your assigned counselor is, share it with us. We're going to help you. We're going to talk it through. This is just to give you kind of some tips just to get started. You're going to tailor each cover letter to match the internship or job you're applying for. So that's the most important thing. You know, generic cover letters get generic results. So I usually encourage students to think about a cover letter from a 4-paragraph rule perspective. First paragraph, tell the reader why you're writing. And do a wow statement. We'll talk about that in a minute. The next 2 paragraphs are your marketing paragraphs. It's your opportunity to pitch what you have to offer. Those 2 paragraphs tend not to change too much in your first semester. Unless you're applying for radically different types of positions with different types of employers, you're generally going to keep those 2 paragraphs very, very similar. The final paragraph is your closing. Thank you. Thank you for considering me. I've attached some documents if you don't include that information in the first paragraph. But it tends to be very short. And again, like your resume, it's 1 page. So some of the ways to help you would be to go back and read the job description. Save the job description, you know, highlight parts of the job description that resonate with you or that seem to be important for the position. That just helps you to kind of think about the language that you want to use when you are writing to different individuals in different types of organizations. For example, when you're sending your cover letter to a judge, you're going to pay attention to the experience that you've had that demonstrates research and writing. You're thinking about what they may want a judicial intern to do in chambers. So you're thinking about how am I going to illustrate experiences that will make sense in that environment. So as you go back and you read through those job descriptions, pay attention to what people are saying that they want the candidate to be able to do and what they would prefer the candidates to be able to do. That's important. You know, sometimes they'll say, all right, these are the requirements. And then other times they'll say, you know, these are absolutes. Research the employer. Just take a moment, go to the website, have a sense of what the employer is about so that you can formulate good questions and you can think about, why would I want to work there? What connects me to this employer? Why would my experience be relevant to this employer? And how am I going to develop a good pitch to market myself? Before you begin writing, answer the question, why should the employer interview you, right? The resume's job is to get you an interview. The interview's job is to get you an offer. That's that process. I'd go back to that every single time. Always remember, your document's job is to get you the interview. Your job is to seal the deal in the interview. Focus on how your skills fit the needs of the prospective employer. It's really easy for us as job seekers to think about, all right, this is what I need. But your job is to think about, how am I going to help that reader to know that I would be a low risk hire, that I would add value immediately in some way, shape, or form. We know that a well-written cover letter shouldn't focus on the employer, what the employer can do for you, but what you can do for the employer. Hard to do when you're a 1L, applying to organizations where you don't have any experience, but trust me, the skills that you've developed in other areas of your life and in academia can be translated. There are definitely ways to tease that out. So we don't want you to feel intimidated by that at all. So critical in crafting your cover letters to a targeted audience will be identify your main selling point. So as you are doing your research and looking at the employers, think about, what is it that I have to offer? You may include something that's going to spark someone's interest. A long time ago, when I was working with engineering students, I had a student come in and say to me, I grew up on a farm. I have taken apart and put together John Deere equipment every day for the last 10 years of my life. And I want to apply for a job as an engineer with John Deere. This is one of the first things he put in his cover letter. And he got an interview, he got an offer, and he got a job. He made the connection right out of the gate that he knew their equipment and he knew their business. It's hard to do sometimes when you're really offering skills that are service-based, but trust me, there are ways to connect the dots. Begin your letter with your most persuasive argument. That is a challenge sometimes. You're going to find that sometimes you're more transactional. You know, I'm a first-year law student at Albany Law. I'm writing to apply for blah, 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 blah. Sometimes that's the best way to begin. There are other times that you're beginning with something a little bit more creative. If you are someone who has other experience that you would be bringing to the law firm, you might start with something, you know, as a professional with over 10 years of experience in the field of social work. I'm very interested in bridging my experience in social work with my legal skills that I'm developing. So there are different ways to pitch yourself and different ways to include that information in the first paragraph. Work with us. We want to help you. Those stories are important, but you don't want to put in too much information in the first paragraph or you'll lose your audience. You don't have to feel obligated to organize the experience on a cover letter in reverse or chronological order. And we can talk to you about that. Sometimes you're putting your best information first, and that may have been something that occurred a year or two ago versus something that you're currently doing. As I mentioned about connecting the dots, you're helping the reader to see, you know, what are the skills that you have that they would find relevant. Write using your own voice. That is a challenge for us as we are helping students to make sure that we don't impose our voice on you. So as you are writing and you're thinking about your writing style, stay true to that, but remember to write short sentences. Don't make them long. Don't make them wordy. I still write, when I do comments for my students, be careful with run-on sentences. If it's taking you too long to say it, then just break it up and two different thoughts, sometimes three. Avoid using self-serving conclusory statements. They don't want to hear that you're perfect or uniquely qualified or ideal for the job. You don't need to do that. They know that you're a first-year law student, and unless you have an immense amount of professional experience from another professional area, they know that you are just beginning. So you don't have to worry about adding a lot of fluff. You're going to set forth the facts. You're going to provide evidence that you're a strong candidate because of the skills and your your background. Again, short sentences, keep them simple. There are different ways to initiate the language in your cover letter. You can replace the word aided and helped and assisted and supported with some more descriptive and active verbs. And as I said, we do have a handout that has some really good sort of a cheat sheet of active verbs that will help you to think about how to replace it. That doesn't mean you always have to. Trust me. There are times when saying helped or assisted is appropriate because that's exactly what you did. Use your active voice. That's important. We won't go into too much detail, you know that. But when you're starting to write things about what you know how to do within the legal profession, this is a great example. Compare this statement. The motion was drafted by me versus I drafted the motion, right? Short, simple, sweet. Proofread, proofread, proofread. We cannot say this too much. And I say this with all sincerity. This year, just as in every year with the 1L class, someone will send a document to someone and they'll address it to the wrong person because they copied one cover letter to use the next time. So when you're proofing, take your job description, take whatever information you have and just get in the habit of comparing. Here's the job description, here's the person, have I included that? You know, we always get one person. We wish we didn't. You know, I'd love for your class of 2023. You'll be the group that doesn't have one. But just pay attention to that. So, who can proofread for you? First, you, friend, roommate, definitely your career counselor. We want you to start to develop good habits when you're doing your cover letter. So send them to us. Many of my students, I got one this morning, students will send me a cover letter and attach the job description. Sometimes that's really helpful, especially if they feel like they're missing the mark. Send both documents and say, look, I'm struggling with XYZ. What would you suggest? That's a really helpful thing, especially because we're doing so much virtually as opposed to being in person. Whatever you can help us to help you, that's a great thing, okay? But don't send your job description and ask how you should write the whole cover letter, because trust me when I tell you that my colleagues, Dean Fitzpatrick and Joanne Casey, the three of us see students, will probably not be too fond of that. So before we get to the next steps, let's just take a look at a cover letter. Sorry about that. I am going to leave time for some questions. I know that many people will have questions, so we'll do that as well. Let's just take a look at this. Sorry about that. Not the right document, I don't think. Can you see that? Can you see the cover letter okay? Awesome. Again, Sally Smith, you're going to see the same exact heading. So we're branding your documents the same way. Same font style, don't change them up. Nobody wants to see that. If an employer laid out all of your documents that they received, they want them all to be branded the same way. You're going to start with the date. And then in the case of Sally, she's applying to the New York District Office of the EEOC, but it's part of the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So when you're addressing something to an individual who is an attorney, start with their first name and last name, and then list ESQ. If you're sending a cover letter to someone and they are a hiring manager, but they're not an attorney, you can start this by including Mr. Conrad Batog, and you could include his title below that. That's fine. We're going to give you those clues, and you'll see that in the packet that I send you tomorrow. For this particular application, the student is including the name of the employer, the specific legal unit, or the legal unit, the street address, and then the city, the state, and the zip. And then you're skipping some spaces. Again, your formatting is impeccable. And you are addressing it to Dear Mr. Batog with a colon. You're always using a colon when you're sending legal cover letters. And in this case, as I mentioned to you before, sometimes they're pretty dry, the first paragraph. So in this case, I'm a first-year student at Albany Law School. I'm writing to apply for a summer 2021 internship with the legal unit of the New York District Office of the EEOC. In this case, because Sally's experience, if you remember, she was a spa director, she became interested in employment law while working as a spa director and managing a staff of 15 therapists. She wants to further her interest in employment law and hopes to bring her experience to the work of your office. Short, sweet, clean. But it lets the reader know she has an interest in employment law and where that came from. So again, the next two paragraphs are really devoted to providing the reader with some specifics that hopefully will lay out her case. That when she, as spa director, she served as a liaison, and in that situation found that some of these staff were paid poorly. And so she did a little bit of research, and then she advocated on their behalf. So what you're finding with this is that even though it's completely unrelated to the legal profession, there are ways to tease out some good information and to make a case for yourself. So these two paragraphs can really, really help you to present the skills, the experience, the academic, writing, research, all the things that you would bring to bear. And then closing very simply. Then close my resume for your review. Thank you for considering my candidacy. I hope to have the opportunity to interview with you. If you are sending this by email, some folks will still put in their signature. They'll scan it and send it. They'll scan their signature. It's okay if it's blank, but if you're sending things to a judge, you may consider writing your signature between your closing and your name so that you are being professional. I don't like to use old school. I think it's professional. So think about your audience. Some people don't care, but some people do. And that is a hard thing to figure out early on, but will help you. So the last couple of things that I want to do before I open this up to questions, just to talk about some of the next steps that we have. And that will be okay. So next steps. So there are sample resumes that you can find through Albany Law Link from your desktop. When you log into your main page on the right-hand side, I think that's where I think where they're located. You'll see sample resumes for 1Ls. You can click on there. You can take a look at them. As I said, I'm going to send a packet tomorrow, which will include some information and just some other samples. In addition, review and update your resume before you schedule your first counseling appointment. It doesn't have to be in its final version. It won't be. But work on it, make some changes, make sure that you move your education around so that you're including Albany Law before your recent, either if you have advanced degrees or your undergraduate degree. After you work with your individual counselor, and what will happen is that during that first appointment, we'll talk about some of the different things that we can do to help you with your job search going forward, but we'll give you feedback on your resume and talk about your ICP, your individual career plan. We'll go back and forth with your resume by email, probably once or twice, not very much. We find that it's students are pick up really quick. Once it's good to go, then we'll go in and we'll actually give you the service to upload your resume into Albany Law Link. Once that happens, it actually opens or establishes your document library. And in that document library, it will hold up to 10 documents at a time, which must include that first resume, which will be designated as your default resume. You can upload other resumes, but don't convert one to a new default until you, or don't delete your first one until you make something else a default. It's just really important to hold your document library open, okay? If you ever get into a situation where you do the opposite, just email your counselor or reach out to Lima. We handle that all the time. But once we give you that permission to upload the document, then you can actually use the resume and the cover letters that you'll upload for spring recruiting. And that's really what we're preparing for. So right now, you've got plenty of time, and we cannot say that loudly enough. Some students are jumping to do this right away. There are very few organizations who will look at 1Ls before the winter and spring semester. Historically, the judges for the first summer after your first year who are looking at judicial interns will look for applications during the winter break. So that means if you have that aspiration and you do well this semester, you'll work with your individual career counselor to put together your documents by the end of this semester. And then once you have your grades and your rank, then you'll be submitting that information. I'm bringing this up because it comes up all the time. Students want to know that time frame, and I want everyone to know it right out of the gate. Other organizations may begin to post this semester and may have some early application deadlines, but you'll get information from us, either directly from Lima Hawk or my colleague Meg Wager. We'll send out information that gives you kind of a heads up, okay? One of the next things I'd like you to remember to do is RSVP for the program that we're holding on the 29th. We did have to change the date. So the 29th is Resources for Looking for a Summer Internship. That's a good program to attend. That's going to be held at 4 o'clock on September 29th, again, virtually. But it will kind of give you a first view into where are some of the places to begin to look, what are some of the resources, and then if we do have some dates for employers who have early postings, we'll share that with you by the end of the month as well. And then again, beginning on October 15th, you'll be able to start to schedule those appointments. With your resume, your ICP, you'll be good to go. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself. We have a few more minutes before the close of the program. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. But I encourage you to don't overthink this process. Work with your career counselor. Be careful where you get your advice. Sometimes students share advice with each other that may not be accurate. So just, ask for advice and get feedback that will be helpful to you in your own personal circumstances. It's really good to see your faces. I can't tell you how much I miss being on campus and seeing all the first years. Like, that's the most fun. That is the most fun. Anybody have any questions? Nothing? Going once? Going twice?
Sold to the man in the purple hat.
Well, listen, it's nice to see all of you. We look forward to working with you. If you've got questions afterwards, you can always send them to me about the presentation. We will be posting this so that if you've got friends that missed it today, we'll be sending it out. Lima's great about that. She sends things out as soon as we make those available. But I wish you luck. Have a great rest of the day. And if you're one of my assigned students, I'll see you after October 15th. Have a great night. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.